Hey guys, welcome back to As Man Thinketh on Unas TV. If you are a farmer in Idaho, you might be noticing some low-flying helicopters with some cylindrical tubes on the front of them. These helicopters are nothing to worry about. They're just shooting radar deep down into the earth. It probably has no impact on you. If it does, just think of it as a free radiology treatment. And they are studying, they're doing a geological survey of your farmland in the surrounding areas, all the way up into Montana. I'm going to put a map up here so you guys can see where this geological survey is taking place. A lot of this is taking place in areas that you're probably familiar with the recent water curtailment. So Bingham County, Blaine, Bonneville, Butte, Clark, Custer, Jefferson, and Lemhi in Idaho. And then in Montana, there's Beaverhead, Deer Lodge, Madison, Silver Bow. All of these areas are along the Idaho-Montana Cobalt Belt. And basically, the purpose of the survey is to provide images that expand the fundamental knowledge of geology underpinning the Great Falls Teutonic Zone in the Montana-Idaho Cobalt Belt. The area of interest covers numerous focus areas that are prospective for critical mineral resources and is designed to assist with the mapping of subsurface faults for earthquake hazard studies. They'll also be looking into the water flows out of the aquifer so they can better understand the aquifer with this study. So this is a pretty big study. It's going to take several months. They have 2 helicopters that will be flying out, and they'll be flying pretty low. Some people have asked me if this has anything to do with the Idaho water curtailment, and my research points to yes, but I also don't want to, draw up something that causes a lot of worry for people. So what I'd rather do is kind of present to you what I know about this situation, what I think the connections are, and you can decide on your own what you think about it. I also think it's important that we consider, the overall purposes of why they're doing this and, what that actually means for us as Americans. For those of you who have forgotten or don't know about it, on May 30th, the Idaho Department of Water Resources issued a water curtailment on roughly 695,000 acres of farmland, or 80% of the farmland in this area. And they issued that curtailment because they had found a 72,000 water acre shortage for the surface water users. And so they actually curtailed about 1 million water acres of water to make up for that 72,000 water acres. Frank Vandersloot had a good explanation on this, so I'm just going to play that for you real quick.
In the first place, the Department of Water Resources called for shutting down 695,000 acres. The order didn't say that. The order called for 1.6 million acre feet. 1.6 million acre feet. Now, why did they do that? Because they needed 42,000 acre feet in Twin Falls. You say, whoa. Just a second. They needed, 72,000. They needed 72,000 acre feet of water in Twin Falls? And you're gonna close down 1.6 million acre feet up here? How does that make any sense? Well, I'll tell you why it makes sense. And translated, acre feet is amounts of water, big amounts. Let's turn it into acres. They needed water to irrigate 12,000 acres in Twin Falls, and they demanded to shut down 695,000 acres up here. That's not a good trade, I think. I don't think you have to be a mathematician or very bright to know that's not a good trade. Why is that? Why do we have to shut off that much up here? It's because the aquifer is not efficient in how it distributes water. They don't know. They have these fancy formulas. Nobody knows. It's kind of like global warming. Nobody knows if it's right. There's calculations, and that's their best guess. There's a lot of science that goes into it. I don't claim to be an expert, but they said that's what you need to do. They need 72,000 down here. This was a forecast that was done. The order came out on May 30th, and so that's what happened. Now, why? Because aquifer is not efficient. The aquifer is, they tell me, has as much water as Lake Erie in it. We can't see where it goes. It goes different places, and it goes everywhere. So if we put water in here, or don't use it, we put water in, it flows downstream in the aquifer, and eventually makes its way back into the Snake River. So they have these basalt barriers that come in, then it funnels the water into, it all goes downstream. It all goes back into the Snake River eventually. If you leave it in the aquifer is like a big leaky bathtub, they tell me, like a bathtub full of bullet holes. And you can fill it up, it's gonna leak back down. You can just keep water in and you can get it to come up, but then it'll go back down. And where does it go? Into the Snake River. And you say, okay, so just a second. We're gonna close down 1.6 million acre feet to give them 72,000. What happened to the other 1.5 million acre feet? Where does that go? Well, it goes all over the place, except eventually it goes back into the Snake River, down to Idaho Power, and then to Oregon, and then to Washington.
Makes perfect sense, right? So they shut these farmers off, and the thing about this is they did it after crops were already in the ground, okay? So on June 11th, when the Water Resources Department goes out and starts red tagging wells for compliance, saying, hey, look, this well needs to be shut off, you turn it on, you could face criminal charges, and they started doing this across Idaho. Well, those farmers could not turn their wells on to water their crops, and so you actually did have crop damage, because even though this only went on for about a week before it was reversed, that week caused crop damage. Crops weren't getting the water that they need, the resources that they need. Farmers lost money just in a week. It'd be like us going through, a week of drought or a week or two of drought. It could have some impacts depending on, what stage your crop's growth were in. We don't know the full extent of those impacts. They could have been minor for all I know, but there were impacts. What happened with the water curtailment stems back to an agreement from 2015. And in that agreement, a group of groundwater users and a group of surface water users, which are basically junior and senior water rights holders, got together to come up with an agreement to keep a water curtailment from impacting junior water rights users. This agreement was supposed to offer groundwater users a structure that would safeguard them against future water curtailments. However, any safe harboring or safeguarding was only in the preamble of the agreement. The whereas parts wasn't actually in the body of the agreement. And nobody really knows what happened back when this took place. There were very few farmers even knew that this agreement was being drawn up, and so it didn't have a whole lot of input from a lot of the farmers that were impacted. But bottom line, there were a lot of oversights in that agreement, oversights that ended up costing the farmers dearly. I mean, they basically signed their death sentence as well as all the other groundwater users in the district. I'm not putting blame on them. It's more of an attorney thing than it is the farmers trying to negotiate the contracts. So they're trying to negotiate the points. It was up to the attorneys to make sure the points were in the contracts. So this agreement goes into effect for about 6 years, right? And then in 2021, all of a sudden, the Idaho Department of Water Resources says, you know what, we don't want to count averaging anymore. And what's averaging? Well, under the agreement, you have good water years, and then you have bad water years, and you have average water years. So they base their water usage off of average water years. And on the good water years, that good water stayed into the aquifer, built it up like money in a savings bank, right? On the bad water years, they spent excess water. So they took water out of their savings account, the aquifer, and were able to water their crops and keep themselves going. So the overall agreement was you have a baseline, and we're going to base your water usage off of that baseline. It makes perfect sense. It allows for planning, right? You can plan that you're going to be able to plant crops this year and how much water you're going to be able to use because you're going off of an average baseline. Like I said, in 2021, they nixed the whole averaging concept. Back when they nixed the averaging concept, they actually went to court over it. The groundwater users were like, hey, you can't do that. We had an agreement. This could end up messing with us, right? So they go to court, the Supreme Court looks at it and says, well, what does your state law say about this? If your state law doesn't have anything to say about this, then, the agency has the right to legislate. And so they went back to the state legislators. The state legislators did nothing. And if you read about this issue currently right now, the same thing is happening again. The state legislators are doing nothing. Governor Little has basically said this has to be an agreement between the farmers. I don't necessarily disagree with him on it, but the problem with this is that you have one group of farmers that have complete control over the conversation because of the state law, regardless of what the junior rights holders want or try and negotiate for, they kind of have a gun to their head that says, hey, you're going to end up signing our deal at the end of the day, because if you don't, we're just going to shut your water off. The law allows us to do that. We already did it to you earlier this year. You saw what can happen. So it's not a very fair conversation. And I do blame that a little bit on the state kind of not wanting to get involved with legislature around this particular concept. But anyway, this thing went back to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court obviously ruled in the favor of the Idaho Department of Water Resources, because there's no state law that says anything else. In 2023, the Idaho Department of Water Resources came out again and changed the rules and how they calculate shortages in water. So they changed their calculation methods. And this, I'm going to get a little bit into the timeline of when that happened in a few minutes, because it's very curious. But when they changed that rule, that's what created this massive shortage where they had to shut down 1 million acre-feet of water to make up for 72,000 acre-feet. So that's kind of the brief background history, for dummies on this particular subject. You have these certain rule changes that occurred over time. The agreement is pretty much outdated, null and void. Farmers have a gun to their heads to negotiate with other farmers. But it's not just other farmers that they're negotiating with. And that's where this whole thing gets tricky.
What happened to the other 1.5 million acre feet? Where does that go? Well, it goes all over the place, except eventually it goes back into the Snake River, down to Idaho Power.
Frank Vandersloot, in one of his interviews, brought up an interesting point to me. And that was that on April 19th, that's when the Idaho Department of Water Resources made a press release on their website kind of announcing that this was a problem and that these farmers could face curtailment. At that time, Idaho Power stock reversed rather dramatically. It had been falling, and it dramatically reversed.
Is the stock price from IdaCorp, that's the parent company of Idaho Power. On April 18th, by the way, the stock had been going down until April 18th, the governor's office announces that they're turning off the water to this area, the groundwater. Then the stock price of Idaho Power jumps, and it jumps again the next day and the next day, and continues to go up for the next 30 days. Okay, this was the turnaround day. That was the low. Everything turned around. Why does that happen? Why does, when the governor says, I'm going to turn off the farmer's water, does the stock price of Idaho Power jump?
A lot of people could look at this and say, okay, well, based on his description of where the water goes, increased water flow on the river obviously creates more energy, and therefore Idaho Power benefits the most. Nobody's pointing fingers at Idaho Power, and I think it's important to remember that Idaho Power could simply just be an investment strategy here. But the point is they made their stock price made a tremendous reversal on the release of this news. Another key correlating date is when they went out around June 11th to actually start shutting off wells. You started seeing a high volume of shares trade of Idaho Power.
Then there's this question. This is a graph of the amount of shares traded, okay? Now, it normally runs about 300,000 on average, 300,000 shares traded of IdaCorp per day. Until June 11th, which is the date the governor actually they send these people out to actually shut down the wells. They start red tagging wells and turning off wells. On that day, the volume, the number of shares traded that day of Idaho Power go from 300,000 to over 1.3 million shares in that day.
So my question is, regardless of how much power you create, if you bankrupt half your constituency, if you bankrupt half of Idaho, then, what good does that do you? Nobody's there to buy the power off of you. But if you look at these timelines, there are other things that have been going on, and you can follow these other events even further back in the overall discussion of water curtailment in the state of Idaho. But to kind of put things simply to you, Idaho Power is simply an investment vehicle. The shares are easier to purchase because the other company that I'm going to talk about trades on the OTC exchange, which is, over the counter. It's a penny stock, and realistically, without government funding, it is not profitable. So there's no reason to profit in this particular company. But 20% of this company's expenditures, which are also expenditures being paid for by taxpayers, are going back into Idaho Power. So a smart investor is going to look at the scenario that's unfolding over there and say, okay, if I want to profit off of this, what are the easiest ways to profit right now, instead of taking a very large risk on a penny stock, is to invest in Idaho Power. Idaho Power is going to surge because of this new potential client. And you know what, because of the water curtailments, they're going to have more water flow going down the Snake River, which is going to increase, the capacity to which Idaho Power can supply power. It's going to make it cheaper for everybody, more profitable for Idaho Power. I mean, all of this makes perfect sense. So that other company is Jarvis, who owns the Cobalt mine up there in Salmon, Idaho. They obtained the mine back in 2019. They were going to open the mine up, I think it was in around 2021, 2022. 2022, I think, was when they had their groundbreaking ceremony. And then they immediately closed their doors before they even opened because the price of cobalt plummeted. It wasn't profitable for them to open up the mine and start mining for cobalt at that time. So they abandoned the project, essentially. They said, we're not going to mine here. The following year, the Department of Defense came out and gave Jarvis about $15 million to expand their knowledge of how much cobalt is in the ground and figure out how much cobalt they can pull out of it. It's not unusual for the Department of Defense to invest in foreign assets. In fact, the Department of Defense just gave $20 million to Electra, which is a Canadian company, to build a cobalt battery plant in Canada. Global warming is a matter of our national security. So if we can put everybody in electric cars, then we're solving national security issues. That's what the Department of Defense does. Like I said, mining is very energy intensive, especially the way that Jarvis wants to mine this particular mine. The mine before was a strip mine, which is typically what you see of cobalt mines. It created immense pollution problems. It was originally opened around World War II, I believe, or it was utilized in World War II. And it created decades of problems with everything from fish populations going extinct to other issues with groundwater, because you're basically mining for these minerals that are in high concentrations and are powerful pollutants, okay? So Jarvis wants to reopen this mine coming from the concept of utilizing green energy. So they're probably going to be using a lot more electricity in place of where they would use fossil fuel machines. And they do have all of that. I mean, they have electric drilling machines, they have all of these things. They also, instead of strip mining, they're going to go down and by using technologies such as these geological surveys, they're going to be able to pinpoint where the cobalt is, just take a tunnel down, get to it, extract it, close it up, and move on to the next one. So they're not going to have to do this massive strip mining and defacing of, the entire mountainside, which the last company was kind of doing. So it sounds a lot better, but that mining also, when you start doing tunnels and all that, you have to start putting in ventilation, you have more lighting, electricity. So basically, where most mines, 20% of their operating costs go to energy, it might actually be a little higher than that with the Jarvis mine. So there's going to be a lot of electricity that's going into this mine. And even on the Jarvis website, it says electricity at ICO is provided by Idaho Power, an Idaho corporation, which draws more than 75% of its energy mix from renewable sources as of 2019. It was the first investor-owned utility to establish a clean energy goal without a government requirement, aiming to be 100% clean energy by 2045 and offer additional green energy solutions for more renewable carbon-free electricity. So that was a nice little pitch for Idaho Power. ICO continues to discuss future opportunities with Idaho Power that may allow ICO to take advantage of Idaho Power's innovative approach toward clean energy, continuing to reduce ICO's already industry-leading carbon footprint. They're industry-leading because their main mine hasn't been in operation yet. But besides that, the point is that there's obviously there's this cooperation between Idaho Power and Jervos and this mine, and trying to mine it using clean energy, which is being created from the hydrology of the Snake River. So there you have more of a connection between, you know, water flows of the river, the power company, and this mining company, and why the power company is now all of a sudden in a position to be a lot more profitable. It's going to be a lot more profitable if they can get that mine open. The other thing that the mine needs besides electricity is a heck of a lot of water. Okay, that's why they're using these surveys to understand the flow of the aquifer, because by understanding the flow of the aquifer, they're going to know how much water needs to be in the aquifer in order for them to access it at the points that they need to for the mine. So if you're a wise investor, you would invest in the power company right now. Jervos doesn't necessarily have anything that's profitable. All the work that they're doing is being done off of government dollars. There's nothing really to profit off of until they can figure it out. And even then, just them going in and spending $15 million on drilling and other things to have a better understanding of what's there is generating more profit for Idaho Power. Okay, so here's the thing. The Department of Defense announced this relationship with Jervos in June of 2023. And it was welcoming news because, you know, a lot of people want things manufactured in the US. A lot of people want us to be energy independent. A lot of people want these things. I want to see these things happen. I don't know that we all have to be driving around electric cars, and cobalt mining and lithium, they have severe environmental impacts. I don't necessarily like the fact that we're pulling those minerals out. Point is, that's the direction that all of this is going, right? So the Department of Defense makes this investment in June of 2023. Well, what happened in July of 2023? In July of 2023, if you remember, in 2023, the Department of Water Resources changed the metrics on how it calculates a water shortage. That happened in July of 2023, exactly 1 month after the Department of Defense made this $15 million investment into Jervos doing more exploration. So when people ask, you know, does any of this just have anything to do with the water curtailment? I would say yes. I would say that, you know, what happened with Idaho Power. Idaho Power is a senior water rights holder. They're a surface rights holder. The higher the flow of that river, the more profitable they are, because the cheaper it is to create electricity, the more excess electricity they can make, the higher their profit margins are. But it also puts them in a unique position where if you can increase water flow, if you can increase water supply within the area so you can get this mine open, that's one of the hurdles that the mine has faced, getting clean electricity, clean energy up to the mine. This mine is a very large operation. If this mine is able to open, and based on the surface area that they're looking at now, which it covers a large amount of land, the Cobalt tract between Idaho and Montana is the only place in the United States that I'm aware of where they have this much cobalt, where they have any cobalt. So if we want to be energy independent, if we want to have these resources, this is the area where it's going to come from. It doesn't matter if we're polluting the heck out of the area that's right next to Yellowstone National Park. Point is that that's where our resources are. And if the Department of Defense wants it, they're going to get it. Jervos may never be a profitable company because the price of cobalt may forever be, you know, tainted by subsidies coming out of China. I mean, China subsidizes the heck out of their mining industry to make everything cheaper so that we can never be profitable operating those businesses on our own here in the United States or elsewhere in the world. And that's exactly what happened with Jervos. When they went in to open this mine, everything was, you saw the same thing happen with fracking. Remember when we started fracking everywhere and all of a sudden oil prices dropped because OPEC didn't want us competing with them. It happens everywhere. Nobody wanted the Jervos mine to open up. The Department of Defense said, you know what, we're going to move this thing forward anyway. We're going to give them $15 million. We're going to, see where we can get the rest of our funds from, because the funds that they're using right now, they, are fairly limited on. And then we're also going to give $20 million to this cobalt battery plant to open up closer to our border in Canada, all for our national security, national defense. I think it puts us in a compromising situation. Do we want to lose our farmland, our food, and our resources in exchange for this new age technology, electric cars, these giant batteries that nobody still knows completely what to do with them once they go bad? These are all things that we have to consider. You know, this is happening in real time. We're watching it. When you look across the United States, I did a video on this, you have these huge, like 200-mile wide, 300-mile wide, in Maryland, 70-mile wide tracks that they're running for electric lines, because this is what the green energy industry looks like. You know, it looks like less farmland. It looks like we're going to trade off our farmers up in Idaho and Montana in order to be able to reopen this mine and have the minerals we need to build all the batteries that we have to have. I'm 100% made in America, but I'm also somebody who looks at this and says it's a shame. You know, it's a shame. I don't want to see that part of Idaho getting torn apart. Now, I know that they're saying that they can do it in a clean and effective way, but they're going to permanently change that landscape. And there's no way to completely eliminate the prospects of significant pollution. I mean, it's already a Superfund site. That particular mine is already a Superfund site because of the high concentration of the minerals up there that have been just, I mean, it's sad. It's really sad. And, you know, the other question that I always come up with when it comes to this stuff, when it comes to the power lines, when it comes to, you know, a certificate of take on a farm in Virginia so that they can run water, a water intake off of the river to feed data centers, is, you know, we're taking property, we're taking business away from private businesses. You know, if you can't water your crops, you're going out of business. You're going bankrupt. So we were taking, you know, hundreds of people, thousands of people who have private businesses, have operated those private businesses as citizens of the United States. We're basically threatening them so that a company from Australia and a power company can profit off of mining. It's like, you know, is that a good use of eminent domain? I would say no. This isn't an eminent domain case. It could eventually be. I don't know what they're planning on finding with all those surveys, or how far they're planning on going with this mining process, how big they want it to be. My guess is that if the government gets involved with spending, I mean, you could just, the sky is the limit, right? We could spend money like drunken sailors. But it also borders on that question of, you know, if we want made in America, we want all these things like energy independence, you know, where are those sacrifices? I mean, personally, I feel like it's a bad sacrifice. I feel like if you're going to sacrifice your food supply, I mean, that's basically a self-inflicting wound. But I also don't see the need for all these data centers. I also don't necessarily want to drive an electric vehicle. Those aren't things that I have on my plate that I want, that I think I would enjoy, nor are they things that I think that will benefit from. But there are other people that do think will benefit from them, and they think that those things are more important than food. Anyway, guys, later this week, I'll talk a little more about what's happening in Maryland and Georgia and some other areas across the United States. I mentioned Virginia. That family actually had a statement of take filed, which sounds exactly what it is. It's a statement of take. The county's taking their land. So I'll put those updates out a little later this week, if I get some time. We've been working on a lot of projects around here. Until next time, stay safe.